Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's event with two brilliant and beloved authors. We have Michelle Ruiz Keil and MK Chavez here to celebrate Michelle's second novel, Summer in the City of Roses. My name is Evan Karp. I'm the events manager for Booksmith. We're an independent bookstore in a mainstay of San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district since 1976. Without further ado, tonight's stars. MK Chavez is a Black Latinx writer and educator. She's the author of Dear Animal and several chapbooks. Chavez co-curates the reading series Lyrics and Dirges, is co-director of the Berkeley Poetry Festival, and poetry editor at Bronzeville Quarterly. She's a recipient of the Penn Oakland Award and the 2021 San Francisco Foundation Nomadic Press Literary Award. I'm just realizing I haven't had a chance to congratulate MK for that, so I just want to congratulate you, MK. You can find recent work at the Academy of Poets Poem a Day series in Golden Gate Park, Among the Trees with the Voice of Trees project. And Michelle Ruiz Keil is a Latinx writer and tarot reader with an eye for the enchanted and a way with animals. Her critically acclaimed debut novel, All of Us with Wings, was called A Transcendent Journey by the New York Times. A San Francisco Bay Area native, Michelle has lived in Portland, Oregon for many years. She curates the fairy tale reading series, All Kinds of Fur, and lives with her family in a cottage where the forest meets the city. Y'all show some love for Michelle and MK in the chat. Michelle, congratulations on the book. We're very happy to have you back for this. Some of you might have caught our event with Michelle for her first book. MK, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for leading the conversation.
Thank you for that great introduction, Evan. I am really excited to be back here with you, Michelle. We were here for your San Francisco release of All of Us with Wings. So it's very exciting on many different levels. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this is our second time being able to be in conversation, and I'm finding it particularly exciting because we get to actually talk about your new book, which is Summer in the City of Roses. And for me, it feels like we get to talk about your work as well. I think one of the beautiful things about seeing an author have more than one book is that you start to be able to go into their head. You start to be able to go into the worlds that exist in our heads. So I just want to congratulate you and I guess ask if you want to say anything before we get started with questions.
I'm just so excited to be here. I'm so grateful for Booksmith for hosting. I feel like there's a beautiful symmetry. There's sort of an energetic symmetry. I'm a Virgo, it's Virgo season. So I feel like there's a nice symmetry about, that was sort of my second stop on the tour last time. And this is sort of my last official summer tour stop for Summer in the City of Roses. And I'm just really glad to be here and get a little bit, like just seeing the picture down there of the store and just getting some of that energy, because Booksmith was, my neighborhood bookstore when I lived in San Francisco. So yeah, I'm really just happy to be here.
That's really nice. And I actually, one of my first questions for you is actually about place. And so I'm really grateful that you brought up the physicality of Booksmith, and that we were actually, it was pre-COVID, and we were actually in the beautiful back room of the bindery. And it is, for folks who haven't been there, it is really one of the most beautiful spaces to have a book release and to be able to celebrate a book. I've been to a lot of events there. So I'm going to come back to the question. And I guess first I want to, I think I already mentioned that part of me is super excited because you have two books out now in the world, and I'm excited about that because we get to not only read the books, but we also start to get a real sense of what is happening in your head, in your worlds. We're starting to see or at least I am starting to see some trends, and then hopefully we'll be talking about those. I feel like the themes, the worlds that exist in that are your worlds are really relevant to right now. I think especially right now, because we are in such a deep time of transformation in our society, and the the themes that I see you picking up are themes about people's real lives, the stories that we tend not to hear, the stories of the things that we do that are not so great, and the stories about how we carry pain and how that shows up in our lives and in the lives of how everybody kind of navigates all of their different sufferings that they carry with them and how they transform them into something else. And so for me, it's feeling really timely that your book has entered the world. And even though your books couldn't be any more different, because they are really different, for me, one of the things that I found was that there's a lot of similarity. Like I see all the threads that are actually, the similarities. One of the things that I thought about when I was reading Summer in the City of Roses was that I was really impressed by how seen and understood I felt as I was, reading your books. And one of I guess I want to preface with saying that, like with All of Us with Wings, I was in San Francisco and walking, there were things happening with Sochi, your main character, that I could directly relate to, like streets that she was walking down, the place where she got her tongue pierced.
Yes.
Which is one of the places I got my tongue pierced. Yes, twice. That's another discussion.
Story. Yes.
That's another discussion. And I think it is particularly wonderful to be able to visit a place. One of my favorite things about books is that you're able to visit a place that may not exist anymore. And I think in the case of San Francisco, there's a San Francisco that you wrote about that I no longer see, that is very much part of who I was and how I grew up. And then I think you have done the same thing for Summer in the City of Roses, where we are visiting a different Portland, and there are similarities still there.
Yeah.
But you have I guess what I call conjured. You've conjured place, and it's something that I see you doing in your writing kind of regularly. And so my first question for you is about place. Like, what I think as a fellow writer and as a fellow, bruja, I want to know how it is that you have decided that this is kind of the route that you want to go, the route of conjuring place.
Well, I had a really good talk with Samantha Mabry, who is another writer of magic realism, another Latinx writer. And for her, it was the same, where I think that the magic that I see is magic that comes from place, from the land, from the place. There's like when I close my eyes and I think about San Francisco, there is like this sort of like high ethereal blue of the sky and this sort of like wash of light. And in Portland, the light is closer. The sky is brighter. The sky feels closer in. And I think that, just when you start to get the feel of the place, that really leads me into the story. And actually, I was going to read a little bit to you guys, but also, the part that I chose to read, it's funny that you mentioned place, because I was having a really hard time with this book at a certain point. That was a little late in the game, actually, for me to be having a hard time. And part of the problem was I had, I knew the book was set in Portland, but I had a very important place in the story set in a different part of Portland, in a part of Portland that I don't have any personal sort of visceral connection with. I just thought, oh, that's where it would be in the city. But then when I realized it didn't have to be there at all, and I could put it in the part of the city where I first lived when I first came to Portland in the early 90s, or in the I guess early 90s, 93. that is very different now. But if I could go back and find the feel of the place then, yeah, it just opened up the entire book to me, and it made me understand what it was supposed to feel like and what the emotional journey was supposed to be. It was like I couldn't find any of it really until I found the place. And so just to backtrack a little bit, the book is about a brother and a sister, and inspired somewhat by the Grimm fairy tale Little Brother and Little Sister. And it's about a brother and a sister who are extraordinarily close with each other and with their mother. And their mother goes away for the summer. She's an artist and a dancer, and she goes away to a residency for the first time ever. And dad's in charge. And their dad responds to the younger brother's withdrawal and depression at his mom being gone by enrolling him in a wilderness boot camp and using the transport service, which is basically a fancy way to say that they kidnapped him against his will. They take your child against their will as a surprise and bring them to the place if the child is going to be unwilling to attend. And so the father makes this decision, thinking it's the right thing for his son, and then gets his daughter out of the house so this can happen by taking her to a work event in downtown Portland. Whisks her away, tells her she loses it, gets furious, storms out, in an impractical dress and really uncomfortable shoes and no glasses, and loses herself in Old Town in Portland, and is rescued by a very interesting character named George with a pocket pit sidekick named Scout, and finds herself with a partner sort of to help her find her brother. And so that's sort of the part that I wanted to read you. So I think I'm going to read you a little bit just to get you in the place, and then maybe we can talk more about that. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
This is what we'll do. So we're at the point where, so If has gone back with George's help, has found the hotel where her father was, but he's nowhere to be found, and they can't seem to get a hold of him on the phone. And in pre-cell phone reality, as some of you will remember, and some of you may not, if nobody was home, that was it. Nobody was home. You weren't able to get through. So that's sort of where she is. So George has a secret hideout where they stay that no one can really know about in order to keep the place a safe place to stay. George doesn't live at home with family, and has told If that she can come there for the night. So it's chapter 7, Imagination. The sign on the building is shaped like a curvy bull, midnight blue, with a starry flank and horns like crescent moons. Under golden hooves, Taurus Trucking is lettered in faded retroscript with the ghost of an F over the T, a bad joke someone made and someone else scrubbed away. Your Nana was a trucker? George laughs. I mean, yeah, you could say she was. Drove Ethel till she was in her 70s. Ethel? Her tow truck, George says. By the end, it was Ethel the Fourth. They're on Division Street now in Southeast, the sleepier part of the city. To get here, George and If rode over the ferry-lit Hawthorne Bridge, stopping at 4 plaid pantries along the way. But the phone was busy every time. If takes the street in, opening all her senses as wide as she can. The sidewalk is clean and smells of summer rain. The street is lined with shabby little houses with overgrown yards and weedy parking strips planted with sunflowers and rosemary and lamb's ears that spill over onto the sidewalks. Roses are everywhere, climbing the telephone poles and clinging to fences and front porches cluttered with gardening shoes, children's toys, and boxes of recycling. The odd little stores across the street seem barely plausible as businesses: a washing machine repair shop, barbecue supply outlet, and a barber shop with a sheet of plywood over a broken window and an actual barber's pole out front. It seems fitting that if Orr must be alone in a new world, so should she. Cut off from her family and home, this little neighborhood is If's whole reality. George, a stranger 2 hours ago, is the only person she knows. The thought is a little revolution. If's chest expands, lets in so much air she's a little dizzy. Something akin to relief runs like a feather down her arms. Guilt follows, right on cue. They enter through a side door. If feels the dark container of the garage around her. An old game she and Orr used to play was listing their 3 favorite darknesses. Whoever had the best answers won. Currently, If loves the fur of panthers, Maybelline black eyeliner, and the black velvet coat with black satin lining she stole from the costume closet at school, but is afraid to wear anywhere but alone in her room at night. The darkness in tourist trekking is excellent, soft and deep, with bits of light wavering in like she and George are inside some massive underwater animal. The square building's giant metal garage door and concrete walls distort the sounds of the neighborhood outside. If thinks of Orr's favorite childhood version of Pinocchio, the illustrations done with photographs of puppets. In the scene where the puppet maker father figure Geppetto is stranded inside a whale, there is a whole living room, a table, a lamp. There he mourns the loss of Pinocchio. Maybe Dad is doing that now, drinking whiskey, the empty house sighing around him. Sit tight, George says, a little louder but still conscious of volume. Scout's nails click against the floor. If peels off her shoes, pain, then pleasure, or maybe just relief. They're so similar, she thinks, the same way pain is caught up with want. Scout is at her feet, sniffing the injuries, offering a soft lick. George is moving around the room. Spots of light bloom in the darkness as George turns on a series of flashlights that beam toward the high ceiling, tracing the shape of the empty garage. No trucks? Not anymore, George says. Sold to pay the property tax. My Nana left this place to me. Some people in my family think that isn't fair. They want to help out and run the business till I'm an adult. George's air quotes say it all. My stepdad's in charge of the estate. Tells you something it wasn't anyone blood related. Anyway, he mostly got them off my case before he went back to Iraq. Now I'm sitting here waiting to turn 18. George is like Mom, If realizes. A complicated history and a lot under lock and key. The flip side to this amazing place is that George lives here alone and in secret with no adults around to help, and still rides around at night helping other people. If's stomach doesn't disappointed in herself drop. That's the problem with being young. You're immature, insufferable, and then you realize it and think, why? How could I be that self-absorbed? So, welcome to my humble abode, George says. There's a hay bale with a canvas bullseye target stuck to it in the corner and a tire swing hooked to the rafters by a stout rope. And the other corner is a hammock. Scored on the street, George says. And maybe you want to look around. 1 sec, I'll grab you a flashlight. If turns back to the garage door. It's completely covered in painted images. Oh, she covers her mouth as the syllable bounces around the room, her flashlight illuminating a nearly life-size painting of George as both twins in Gemini, one with waist-length hair, the other with a short cropped buzz. There are birds and flowers and animals, mythical and real, trees, constellations. If moves closer to the Gemini twins, tracing the clasped hands of the two figures with her index finger. It reminds me of this painting. The two Fridas? Yes, I love Frida Kahlo, If says. Me too. I call mine George and Georgina. Touching the long-haired figure, If wonders if this is how George once looked. Are you still both? If asks, hoping it's not the wrong thing to say. Or just George? Good question, George says. Stop right there. Yeah, so I guess it was that. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's one of my favorite parts in the book, actually. It's rather magical to arrive in that unique living space. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that. And I guess I just want to throw in a couple of additional questions around place, because I think it's really interesting to create place, but also to imbue place with a sense of magic and a sense of life. Like most of your places are very alive, and they might look through one person's eyes a particular way, but through another person's eyes a different way. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you make those decisions as a writer. Like, how do you go about that as a writer, deciding how you're going to bring place to life?
I think that it really, so, I really think it starts with place for me, but also the next thing is character. So if I can get into a character's body and into their sensory apparatus and into the way that they sort of filter information, that helps me to understand what to notice. basically, right? Because we all notice different things. And so, you know, I think that with the character If, it was really, she was very difficult for me until I started to understand her as really deeply a theater person, which I have been and in some ways still am. And so when I saw that that her vision is very theatrical, that she really sees things with an artist's eye, I was able to understand the kinds of things that she would notice. And actually, really, when the book started to come together is when I realized that the entire family are artists. The father's an architect and a lover of, you know, built objects and even of sculpture and art. The mom is a dancer and a reader and a writer. And, you know, her brother Orestes is a cellist and a musician. So everyone in the family has this very intense way of interfacing with the world. You know, they've been taught it since they were babies. And I think it's really different to be brought up by artists and to be an artist. Just the kinds of things that there's a scene later in the book where, you know, If is riding the bus and sort of noticing the architecture and the gardens and noticing the class differences that occur in the neighborhoods as the bus climbs up into the hills in Portland, and saying, you know, that it was the result of growing up with an architect and a socialist kitchen witch, you know, that she notices a neighborhood by architecture style and garden and class, you know, that's her view. And so I think that all of those things kind of have to combine to help me figure out how to look at the place to bring it to life.
That's really great. And it's so funny because I feel like I remember this happening last time too. I had all these questions prepared and then you start to share and it takes me to a different place. And this is one of my questions, slightly out of order.
Yeah.
So you both, in both books, one of the things that that I noticed and that I'm sure that other people who really love your books and your writing notice is that your books are rich with characters. You not only imbue place with character, but you also tend to have a lot of characters in your book. And one of the beautiful things, and when I earlier said that I felt really seen in this book, I think what I meant is that in this particular book, both books take up social issues, things that are, you know, that affect us today, every day. But this book is really interesting in that it is weaving many social issues together, but not as social issues, but as life. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I wonder about how you came to that decision to include the things that you did. And I'm thinking about how woven into this book, there's homelessness, there are characters who are homeless, there are young people who are homeless, there's sex work, there's just a whole host of different experiences that people can be living that generally I see in a lot of writing kind of treated separately. It's like there are books where the character is homeless and that's it. There's a character, there's a book, yeah. It's about that. It's about sex. You know, that person is a sex worker. So the book is about sex work. Mm-hmm. And here in this book, I feel like I'm seeing, we're definitely following If and Or. There's a definite story there, but I feel like what's happening is that we're seeing a world that is more like how life is truly experienced, which is, you know, when I was a kid and when I was homeless, I didn't walk around saying, oh my God, I'm homeless every day. I walked around experiencing life, going through every day was kind of an adventure. And sure, there were difficult moments, of course, but my life was still my life and I was experiencing it. And I think that's what you're capturing here. And so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on creating that, a world where many people exist with different life experiences.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's funny because Portland, you know, I've had a complicated relationship with my life in Portland and with the place here. think one of the things is that it's really different to come of age in a place where you have, walked all of its streets at like 4 o'clock in the morning, stayed up all night with your friends, like, rode around in the middle of the night on motorcycles. Like, it's a different reality than moving to a place and starting a family, which is what I did here in Portland. So I was still young when I came here, but I was also a mom. And I was thinking about, and then as the time went on, the things that I noticed about Portland were, I noticed that there weren't as many people of color as I wish there were. And I noticed just a lot of issues around race and around class, and especially now around homelessness. But when I first came here, there was something that I was like, what made me fall in love with this place? So there's something that made us move here, in my crankier moments. And I remembered the things that I loved. And one of the things about this place, especially, 25 years ago, was there was a lot of amazing activism going on a street level. So you might say like, oh, Portland is this white city. But, when I was doing needle exchange, for instance, with Danzine, there were people of color that came to our van all the time. And it's like, so to say that the city is all white really erased those people. And I was thinking about, that was the thing that I loved about the place, was that there was this whole life happening that was there was all this change happening, all this radical stuff happening that was almost kind of like little and practical and street level and DIY. I guess like before DIY was like a whole thing and like a whole section in the bookstore of craft books, it was like people like Teresa Dulce from Danzine, just starting her needle exchange program in a backpack, walking around, the sex work stroll on Southeast 82nd and offering, clean syringes and, oranges. That was what it started like. And then pretty soon she had a table, and then pretty soon the county health department was like, wow, you're reaching a population we can't reach. Borrow our van every Friday night. And so by the time I came, I actually got to be in the van. But, that was the kind of stuff that was happening there. And that was also the kind of stuff that I was seeing and experiencing more, sort of walking around and taking the city in. And so I guess I wanted to remind all of us and myself that this city actually does hold a lot of different kinds of lives. And it is actually, it's kind of a hub for transients as well. There were a lot of, for whatever reason, have always been a lot of homeless youth that come here from other places. And the other thing is that I worked with a lot of youth when I first came to Portland as well, in arts programs and theater programs. And so I was thinking about those guys too, like, yeah, that was their life. And they were able to have an experience and grow as artists. And yeah, there were also kids that were homeless. So like you're saying, it wasn't all just one thing at all. And I guess that was another thing that helped me kind of dive into the book and find the thread of the book. But it also helped me remember what I really love about this place as well, that there were things that I really loved that I think still illuminate it and have still are still there, even though there's a lot of other stuff going on too.
Yeah, I really love the point that you're making about, I have also often heard about how the lack of, diversity that exists in Portland. And it's really interesting because I think that sometimes we blend, we blend certain words. Like we can say, well, there's not that many people of color there, right? With almost non-existent. Really, it's just to blend into, and it's like, well, actually, no, there are people of color. They may not be the majority, or they may not, maybe the places where you are going, they are not.
Right.
And that's a very different thing than they don't exist at all. And there is this kind of very thin, it's like it almost feels like it feels veil thin, where the barrier between kind of crossing over to full erasure. And so I really appreciate your the way in which we see people of color throughout Summer in the City of Roses. It's it's validating, and it's beautiful. I really, I think it's amazing. So, I guess I want to, I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I don't want to miss an opportunity to ask you. I have an animal question for you, and I just don't want it to get lost in there.
No. That's my favorite.
So, and it's connected to character as well, because I feel like there is a mirroring that goes on in your books, and one of the many mirrorings that go on, but this one in particular, I feel like the transformation that I talked about earlier, that people are going through these transformations, and that we are as a people, as a world, going through a transformative moment. In your books, we see transformation happening to the characters, and we actually have characters that are transforming back and forth, or who live in a liminal space. Cats that talk, mice that chew off things, foxes that coyotes that rescue. I mean, there's all these magical, transformative, a kind of multi-world experiences that are happening with animals. And I, would love to hear you talk about that some.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think that for me, it's first of all, I think honestly, it's just like, because I want the world to be that way more. Like, I've been really thinking a lot about futurism, about Latinx futurism, Indigenous futurism. I've been thinking about the way that I think healing can come in the world the more that we can communicate with one another. And we're starting to learn all the time, like the trees are talking to each other, the mycelium are doing all kinds of stuff that I think we don't even know what they're up to. I think we've just scratched the surface of that. So for me, it's like, what I've suspected all along is that everyone is talking to everyone else, and we just can't understand it. And so I get to, when I write, I get to push that, just like, I mean, for some people it's like a huge leap, but for me, it's just like the tiniest little teeny weeny leap to get to that point where, where a boy can be, in a pup tent, after a horribly traumatic, induction into this boot camp, and his little zip ties can be chewed off, by a little mother mouse who has her little infant children asleep in the hair that's just been like forcibly shaved from his head. So to me, that's just like the tiniest little leap. And then once you make that leap, it gets a little easier to keep going. But I don't think that those barriers are as solid as we sometimes believe they are. And so for me, it's always easy to go imaginatively to that place. But I also think that I feel like it could happen, like it could happen. It could happen, so for me, it's kind of like that. It's like it could happen. And I also wonder if, like, if I kind of have a secret hope that if I keep telling stories like that, with that just like little bit, pushing it a little bit, that maybe for some reason that will help. I mean, this is the part of me that's like, in the audience at Peter Pan going like, I do believe in fairies, but still, you never know.
I being somebody who actively wishes to wake up with antlers one morning, I can totally get behind that.
Yeah, I know.
And I will take a tail as well.
A tail. I've always wanted a tail, like from the get-go. Yes.
I have fantasies of having a tail that I can manipulate at meetings, especially. But
yeah,
anyway,
to show your mood. Yes, that's exactly right.
Or to help other people stay in order at a meeting.
That's right.
It would have to be a very long tail. Yes. I love that, and I love the challenging of the world view that we live in, this world where we are the center. Like, humans are really great about that, right? We are the center. And I think the character of Scout, which is an amazing character, there is, I think that is where you really capture the magic in the relationship that we can have with animals. That it doesn't, it is like, I think a lot of people would be hard pressed to believe that a little mouse would on purpose go and like chew off somebody's zip ties.
Yeah.
You know, some of us don't. Some of us don't have that challenge, but some people would. But
Yeah.
I think most people would have a hard time denying the connection that one can have with one's furry companion that can, you know, read the look in our eyes, or even kind of more scientifically speaking, read the hormones that we're putting off and comfort us.
Yeah.
So I love that you include that in your book. And I think we have one question here.
Yeah, sure. Bring it on.
Speaking of characters, it's so interesting to hear Michelle talk about her character as someone she has met, learning about the characters theatrically instead of someone she created. Would love to hear more about this.
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't feel quite like I'm creating them. It feels like I'm opening up a space and then allowing them to come. And maybe I'll intellectually have an idea. Like, to be honest, the seed of this book was I was applying for a residency and they're like, oh, what project are you going to work on while you're here? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. So it was sort of between the time, I think, when All of Us with Wings was out on submission. I wasn't working on something new. And I just wrote, you know, a mashup of the Grimm fairy tale brother and sister and stories about Iphigenia and Orestes set in early 90s Portland, I think was what I said. And that is basically this book. And then I sort of forgot about it until it was time to write a new book. And then I thought, well, yeah, maybe that. And honestly, in the beginning, I don't know why. You know, at first I was like, why these even two stories? They're very different. But then when you really dig in, they're actually both about generational trauma. And that once I realized that, it really helped me to get going also. But I'm really telling myself this story. I think probably, you know, I have a million subconscious reasons. I'm not usually making choices and doing stuff on purpose, really, until, you know, the second or third draft through. Then I'm picking and choosing and getting clearer. And especially with this book, I was able to see it more quickly, more clearly, more quickly, because I think I'm understanding just the scope of a novel, the kind of space it takes up in your brain, and how to get kind of an overview, which takes a while. But so then I did make choices, but really with character, they reveal themselves to me. I will use parts of myself that I'm interested in exploring, or sometimes I'll be inspired by another person. Like, for instance, you know, the character of Orr was sort of inspired by one of my children. It began that way, but then as I progressed through with his lived experience, it was super clear to me that all of his sensory issues, for instance, are sensory issues that I share. And he might have them a little more than I do, or maybe not, actually. But I realized that I put a lot more of myself into him than I had ever intended. And where I thought maybe If was a lot more like I was, because I was sort of a theater nerd in high school, like she is, she became very different from anyone that I know, even, really. I mean, she has this way of thinking that I don't necessarily share all the time, although I think it's very useful for an artist, for sure. So yeah, they do. They reveal themselves to me, and I feel like they sort of aggregate qualities and experiences, and then when you put them in scene with other people, you really see what they're like too, because you get to see them sort of bouncing off of each other. But I'm often very surprised by what they say or do. Yeah, and I can't really explain that, but that's what it feels like. I was like, oh, did she just say that? Now what am I going to do? I don't know what to do now. So sometimes they'll stump me, but I think that the more that I can learn to let that in and just listen, I think the more complicated and real the characters can be. This book really kept flipping me around when it came to character, actually, especially the character of Lorna. She was a challenge and kept surprising me. So yeah, it's that's what's so fun. That's why it's fun to write a novel. That's why I sit down and write a novel. It takes so much time, but it's that surprise that I love. I'm like, oh my God, that's what's going to happen. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, that definitely sounds, just, it sounds like a magical experience, and also one where you're really forced to surrender a little bit to, where the story actually really takes you. So that's amazing to hear you describe that. I'm going to encourage folks to add their questions to the chat, because otherwise I'm going to hoard all of your time because I have many questions.
Add your question, please do.
So, please, folks should feel free to like add their questions and or comments. One of the things that I am really, because as a writer, I spend a lot of time thinking about right now is some of the ways in which we are holding imperfect characters in, like in reviews, in how people are looking at books. And I wanted to, you and I have had some conversations about this. And so I just, I wanted to have the discussion here because I think it's a really important discussion. All of us with wings had, one character, one relationship that people found very problematic. And I definitely think that there is at least one character in this book that people judge harshly. And one of the things that I appreciate about your books is that your characters are not in any way flat. They are really representational of what it is, the messiness it is to be a human being. It's not, you don't have easy characters. They're not like, like 100% can love you, because you're actually completely not human. You're perfect all the time. And so I wanted to ask about your decision to create your characters as human, as flawed beings that are not necessarily always at their best, not making the best choices, and how right now really we're seeing a lot of I'm not sure that the exact word I would use, but I have a lot of active resistance to telling the stories of things that happen in the real world. And I'm curious about your drive, like what drives you to create these characters or create or invite why these characters arrive to you, telling their stories, and what you like, how you hold that given all the potential criticism that can come at you for just writing a story that's about something that actually happens all the time in the world.
Yeah. I've thought about this a lot, actually. And I think, I think it comes a lot out of my own experience as a survivor. I think that I needed, so part of growing up and growing through and like healing, from the difficulties of my childhood was I wanted to understand. And that's, sort of the theater person in me, the acting training maybe in me. I wanted to understand, so for instance, when you're acting, if you're playing the villain, you're not the villain to yourself. If you're playing Iago in Othello, you're not like horrible to yourself. You are doing the best that you can do to get the thing that you want and need. You don't see yourself as the villain. Othello's the villain. Your wife is the villain. Everyone's in your way. It's everyone else's fault, and you're hurt and you're furious and overlooked, so you've got to get into that. I guess what it is that, as humans, we have the potential to have all kinds of experiences. And I think that a flat villain is something that always has bothered me, for one thing. I can't abide by it. I guess because I want to know more, because I guess I feel like it's not true. Even though I'm writing some fantastical things, I'm trying to write something that feels also true to me. And it doesn't feel true if something is all one way. The other thing that gets me into trouble maybe is that when, in my experience so far with these two books, you start writing you start writing into the story. You realize who your characters are. You've got your cast of characters. They kind of come to you, and then you've got to put them together and see what they do, what's going to happen. And for instance, in my first book, when I realized that, a pretty inappropriate, problematic, and difficult, challenging relationship was bound to happen with these two characters, I resisted it myself. I was like, oh, this is going to be a lot of trouble. But then I realized, my characters aren't here to do everything perfectly. They're here to do what they would do. So what is their motivation? And once I understood what the motivation was for each of those characters, I understood exactly what they would do. And in every situation I put them in, it was very easy to find out what they would do. And so, for instance, in Summer in the City of Roses, the poor dad is getting some hate, okay? And I get it. He did something that I actually chose not to do as a parent. I was once advised as a parent to do something similar that this dad did. But I was thinking about him, and for the longest time, I think I probably talked to you about this. I was so stuck because I thought, I know that, Theo Velos is not a horrible person. I know he's not. And I know there's a reason why his kids and his wife love him so dearly, but he does a thing. He does this thing. He chooses to have these strangers come and take his neurodivergent son in the night to this place that, is not a great place, as it turns out. And so what I realized was, guess what? He made a mistake. People make mistakes. And as a parent, I have grown children and I've made a million trillion mistakes, we all have. And I think that his mistake is actually, though, the engine that starts everything happening in the story. And so one of the gifts I found in this mistake this character made was that it motivated change in everyone had to adjust and change in that family, and then even in the people's lives that they touched, because of this mistake that he made. And it made me realize that sometimes, even a mistake is not all one thing. I mean, I think even within the story, or realizes like, wow, this was a horrible thing my father did. I don't know if I could ever forgive him. And yet, if he hadn't done this, I wouldn't be having these experiences that I'm having, because, If ends up with George, or meets this amazing riot girl band called the Furies and lives at their pink house called Penelope and learns all sorts of things about himself that he would never have learned if he had just been in his room with his headphones waiting for his mom to get home all summer. So I just think that, I guess I'm remembering the first author event I ever did. I was on a panel and someone said, like, if you had a soapbox, like for young readers, for instance, what would it be? And I said, well, I think if I had a soapbox, I would be like the Lorax that speaks for the gray area, because all our lives, most of our lives, I think we live it in that area, right? Just in the gray area of people we love making mistakes, not being sure what to do, feeling it out as we go. Something that someone else considers a mistake, we see as this amazing thing for our growth that we had to do to get where we are. There's a million ways to look at sort of any circumstance. And I encourage people to really try to find all of those million ways, because I think that just even if you come back to, a sense of judgment about what someone has done, or deciding like, yeah, that's the wrong thing, it's going to be a little bit different quality, I think, once you have tried on all of these ways of thinking and feeling and being and knowing. And I think it takes away this separateness that is really a false, it's really false. We're not as separate as we would like to think. And so, a right and a wrong character are also not as different as you would like to maybe think. So that is my soapbox, and I think I'm still on it.
I love that soapbox. I am really grateful for writers who take on writing difficult stories that tell about, that give us an opportunity to explore mistakes that we make, consequences, and help us learn. I feel like that is, that is just such an incredible gift, to write those real stories. I think, I also think it's very interesting when characters receive negative feedback,
Yeah, yeah,
almost as if they are real, which is
yeah.
just a fascinating dynamic. And I guess ultimately, I would say I'm grateful to you for creating whatever folks may think or feel like. The truth is, people are talking about things that need to be talked about. People talked about things that needed to be talked about in relation to All of Us with Wings, and they're
Yeah.
talking about things that need to be talked about in relation to Summer in the City of Roses. And
Yeah.
you do have one question that I want to make sure we don't ignore.
Yes.
And then I'm going to have one final question for you,
Okay.
because I'm greedy like that. But Jamie says, I love animals. I love the animal point of view and characters within your writing. How do you bring their thoughts to life?
I think I just imagine into their thinking. I just really try to imagine what it would be like. Sometimes what I do even is I'll research the animal a little bit because they have sensory differences than to ours. So I'll do that a little. I'll just sort of read something, and then I don't think about it much, but it sort of sticks in there, I think. And then I just really do, I honestly think it's maybe acting training, where I'll try to, think about the physicality of that creature, think about what its body feels like in space, what the people look like to them, what all of those things kind of combine to make that animal's experience. And I mean, I'm just like, if I'm sure that if some of these animals ever read my books, they would be like, oh my gosh, she got it so wrong. Like can you imagine? The coyote would be like, I would never do that, so no. Or whatever. I mean, if they could be on Twitter, I'm sure I would hear it, but they're not. So until they get on there, I'm just doing my best, imagining what it's like for them.
I'm really torn because I feel like I could ask you two more questions. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and ask them. So it's a two-part, let's call it a two-part question.
Okay.
So the first part is, I can't help but wonder, if you were going to transform into an animal, what animal would you transform into?
That's changed at different times in my life. I think right now I might transform into something aquatic. I've been really, really craving being in the water. And so I used to feel like I'd want to be a dolphin, but right now, just today, right now, I think if I could become a whale, like a really large whale, one of the whales that goes like down deep and that just like filters the krill and is just sort of like existing and in that world of like sound and water. And I feel like things would be also slowed down there. I think that is what I would like to be right now.
That's magical. I love that.
If you could be an animal right now, what would you be?
Quick story. I was in a difficult meeting yesterday, and the way that I decided to cope with it was by imagining all of us as birds. So, I think I might be some version of a hawk, I think.
Right now.
But I'm like you in that it changes all the time.
Yeah.
And then I just feel like it would be wrong if we didn't ask, what's next? What are you writing? What are you working on for your next book?
Well, I am working on a book for adults. It is a novel in stories, and it's exploring fairy tale tropes and sex work. So we'll see what happens with that. It's in the works. I've been working on it, but honestly, I've been on a little break right now. I think for the summer, I need to get back to it. It's getting to that point where I'm having intrusive thoughts about it, which is good. That means it's time to get back to work. And I'm also working on a short story, like it's in the weirdest way, like almost like one line at a time, about what would happen if everything could talk and communicate with everything else and fall in love with everything else. So if we were truly, truly in love with the entire world, and the world could also be in love with us back, what would that look like? And so I have no idea, but that's the most speculative I've ever gotten. But I'm curious about that, and so I'm working on it.
That's beautiful. Well, you know, that's, well, one, you have a well-deserved break coming at you, and then two, hurry up, because I can't wait to read that book. So yeah, thank you so much for talking with me, being in conversation with me about your beautiful writing, and for putting out the real stories that, you know, of real people, and stories where we can be redeemed and we can find our way despite making mistakes.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what I really want to do. That's what I want to do. And I feel so grateful to be here and to have written this second book. It kind of snuck up on me. You know, it came during the pandemic when everything feels kind of unreal and kind of floaty. And I just have to say, like, you know, this object is, it's like, it's a good object. I recommend having it in your house, not just because I wrote it. It's very beautiful. And also you could get it from the Booksmith, and that would be really lovely, because they are such a great bookstore. They've been so supportive and kind to have me. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you, Evan. I'm going to hand it back to you. It's so wonderful to see you, Evan, and it's wonderful that you continue to host all these really amazing events.
Oh, thank you.
I really, really appreciate it. It's hard to launch a book in a pandemic, and this is so lovely. I really appreciate it.
For sure. It's our pleasure anytime. And I hope we can host you back for that next one. It sounds amazing. And congratulations on Summer in the City of Roses, Michelle. This has really been an insightful conversation. I've enjoyed it myself very much. And I hope you all have to. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Click through the link beneath the vid and get the book. Get it for your friends and enemies and everyone you know. And if not from Booksmith, get it from your independent bookstore, from your favorite neighborhood bookstore. That's okay too. Thank you guys. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and stay well. Have a good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Night.